West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, we begin this hour with breaking news about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is calling for an investigation of Justice Thomas tonight by Attorney General Merrick Garland, quote, for potential violations of the Ethics of Government Act under Chapter 5 of the United States Code, Section 13106. Senator Whitehouse will be our first guest tonight in this breaking news coverage of a first in American history. In the 234-year history of the United States Supreme Court, no member of the United States Supreme Court has ever appeared clearly to break the law until now. Clarence Thomas absolutely violated the federal law cited by Senator Whitehouse in his demand for an investigation of Clarence Thomas by the Attorney General. The law could not be more clear or more simple. It requires Supreme Court justices and other federal employees to report any real estate transaction, quote, which exceeds $1,000 in real property other than property used solely as a personal residence of the reporting individual. The law makes it clear that Clarence Thomas and other federal employees do not have to disclose real estate transactions involving their personal homes, the place where they actually live. Clarence Thomas clearly and sharply violated this law by not reporting the sale of real estate 9 years ago that he owned but did not live in. That sale exceeded $1,000. To not report that sale is a definite and clear violation of federal law by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And it gets worse. Clarence Thomas secretly sold the property to billionaire and Nazi memorabilia collector Harlan Crow in 2014 for $133,363. That real estate sale included the home of Clarence Thomas's mother, who is still living in the home, appears to be still living in that home to this day at age 94. A home owned now by right-wing Republican billionaire Harlan Crow. Clarence Thomas's mother has a roof over her head tonight thanks to a Republican billionaire who is giving it to her. Clarence Thomas was a co-owner of his mother's home with his mother when it was sold to Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow immediately relieved Clarence Thomas of the cost of paying the property tax on the home, and then immediately commissioned an architect to design and build very significant improvements to the home so that Harlan Crow was not just paying for Clarence Thomas's mother to continue living where she was living, but was adding substantial upgrades to Clarence Thomas's mother's home and her daily life. And we should all be very happy for Clarence Thomas's mother that a surge of money into her home in Savannah, Georgia, that a Supreme Court justice could not afford, has significantly improved her living conditions. And the only thing Clarence Thomas had to do to make the entirety of this transaction completely legal in every way for a Supreme Court justice was to simply tell us about it, admit it, report it on his financial disclosure form. But Clarence Thomas appears to believe that his financial relationship to billionaire Harlan Crow is publicly indefensible. And that could be why he decided to hide the most important part of his financial relationship to Harlan Crow, because it is the only part of his financial relationship to Harlan Crow that Clarence Thomas must, without any question, absolutely report on his financial disclosure forms by law. And Clarence Thomas violated that law. The failure to report that transaction is a willful violation of law by a Supreme Court justice, and that has never happened before in the history of this country and the United States Supreme Court. No other member of the Supreme Court in history has ever been shown to be in blatant and full violation of the law. Never once before today's reporting by ProPublica, which revealed for the first time in history a Supreme Court justice's clear violation of law. There are other aspects of Clarence Thomas's financial relationship to billionaire Harlan Crow which may be violations of law, because they have not been reported in Clarence Thomas's financial disclosure forms either. But those violations are not as perfectly clear-cut as this violation is. It can now be said, without qualification, that a Supreme Court justice has absolutely violated federal law. And Clarence Thomas is the only Supreme Court justice in history now known to have done that. Virginia Cantor, a former government ethics lawyer, told ProPublica he needed to report his interest in the sale given the role Crow has played in subsidizing the lifestyle of Thomas and his wife. You have to wonder if this was an effort to put cash in their pockets. You do not have to wonder. It did put cash in their pockets. Harlan Crow did put tens of thousands of dollars of cash directly into Clarence Thomas's pocket on October 15th, 2014, the day that Clarence Thomas, in his own hand, signed the paperwork for the sale. And he did that, he signed that paperwork under the roof of the United States Supreme Court. And it seems he did not have to pay a notary to have his signature notarized that day, because it was notarized by an official of the United States Supreme Court, Perry Thompson, who, ProPublica notes, did not respond to a request for comment. Clarence Thomas signed that deed in the Supreme Court on the 23rd anniversary of the vote in the United States Senate to confirm him to the United States Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas got to do something that most Americans never get to do. Never happens to most people. Something that's never happened to me and never will happen to most Americans. Clarence Thomas inherited something. Most people never get to do that. He inherited his co-ownership of his mother's house from his grandfather. Clarence Thomas lovingly titled his memoir, My Grandfather's Son. A house acquired honorably by Clarence Thomas's grandfather is now owned by a billionaire who approached Clarence Thomas only after Clarence Thomas became a Supreme Court justice. And the only reason a billionaire owns the house Clarence Thomas's mother lives in is because Clarence Thomas is a Supreme Court justice. Harlan Crow did not want to know Clarence Thomas 1 minute before Clarence Thomas became a Supreme Court justice. And in fact, they did not meet until a few years into Clarence Thomas's tenure on the Supreme Court. What would you do for the man who bought your mother's house and immediately got an architect and a construction crew to improve your mother's house for your mother to live in more comfortably as she ages into her 90s? And someone who didn't stop at that, but actually bought more property around your mother's house to improve the neighborhood, which Harlan Crow did, and get rid of the noisy neighbors next door to her by tearing down that house after buying it. The house full of noisy neighbors has disappeared because Harlan Crow bought it and tore it down. So Clarence Thomas's mother has an even better version of her own house to live in for the rest of her life. What would you do for someone who did that for you and your mother? And while he was at it, saved you from ever having to pay property taxes again on that house? And while he was at it, put tens of thousands of dollars in your bank account? But most importantly, he took care of your mother. What would you do for the guy who gives your mother a place to live, the place where she wants to live? If you're a Supreme Court justice, the answer should be you would do absolutely nothing for that guy. You would never let his preferences enter your mind in any way in your workplace. You would never let the goodwill you have for him affect the way you think about anything in the course of your job. And we don't trust human beings to be able to do that. That's why we have laws. That's why we have ethics rules. And that's why it appears tonight increasingly impossible for Clarence Thomas to be able to fulfill his oath as a Supreme Court justice to, quote, these are the words of the Supreme Court justice oath, quote, administer justice without respect to persons and to do equal right to the poor and to the rich.
It is Friday, the 14th of April of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Oh yeah. How are you? We're hanging in there. It's been a busy week here at the mothership with all the personal business that one attends to. And one is also not just within the realms of an immediate family, but one is also reminded of, well, the finality of our staid existence. That's right. Time marches on, and there comes a time when it marches on without us. Or does it? I don't know. We get metaphysical at this point in our lives because, it used to be, middle age. What is middle age? I don't know. You only know what middle age was when, the finality of one's own existence comes into question. So I'm being oblique, but that's because no HIPAA violations around here. No. Not one whit. But, just have some sad news that came down the pike about some about a friend, and then, there's a few other friends in line, I guess one would say, as we all are. Oh, yeah. Well, that out of the way, I wanted to make a few little mentions about what's going on in the news, and I have to say, did the recruiting, even for the National Guard, and one wonders if the National Guard has much of, a filter at any point. I don't know. I just don't know. Do they have a filter to make sure that, you might filter out some bad seeds? On the other hand, this particular guy, Teixeira, he, I guess on paper, he looks like, the kind that they would want. Sufficiently racist, anti-Semite, Christo-fascist, and comes from a military family. So what are you going to do? I mean, that just checks off so many marks right there. You would think it would be enough to get him kicked out. Do we really want racist, anti-Semite, Christo-fascists in our military in any capacity, in any level, even in the Air National Guard? I got to tell you, the Air National Guard, you would expect to, attract a higher quality. Well, I guess they did. They attracted a higher quality of polo shirt Nazis. Is that what they were called back then? The Tiki Torch guys? Jesus. All right. What drew this group together? Shared interests. And what were their shared interests? Racist anti-Semitism, misogyny, guns, and God. And I don't know, if you pick up a few Russian FSB types along the way in your chat room, all the better. Because they love Vlad too. Okay. Sometimes makes you wonder. It does. Now there's a bit of lionization going on because, like I said, the guy on paper looks perfect. Sufficiently racist, anti-Semite, Christo-fascist, comes from a military family. You would expect that nowadays, apparently. So, somehow, a kid, is he a kid, 21 years old, he'd been working in this capacity since he was 19. 19! When I was 19, I know this is an old song, I know people have heard this over and over and over, but I like to, it's sort of like a reminder of how times change. When I was 19, my best friend, John Koenigshofer, and myself organized and held the first Impeach Nixon rally west of the Rockies. And where did we choose it? Just about a quarter mile from where I went to high school. Well, where I grew up when I was going to high school. Family home was still a family home, I might add. About a quarter mile up Yorba Linda Boulevard. So I like to say down Yorba Linda Boulevard is where Richard M. Nixon Park was, which is now the library. And the park itself was this really neat field with, the appropriate picnic tables and the brick barbecue stuff. It was really neat. The veranda, little roof so you can get away from the sun. Even though in Orange County we had a sea breeze, it was still, it could get a little hot in North Orange County because you're not so close to the water, but you are. Regardless, the house that he was born in butted up against the park, so you can see sort of like the back door of it, and it was fairly nondescript. And I don't know, now that I think about it, whether I was certain that the people who lived there rented or owned it, but the people who lived there were just like, they were renting or owning the place. And it was really cute because when we had the rally, and it was well attended and had a bit of a kerfuffle with the Yorba Linda City Council and a few other people. You know, the typical bomb threats and death threats that you would expect. They have a long history of violent intimidation. Yeah, I'm going off on a tangent. In the lead up to this rally, my dad had bomb threats called in at his office at Cal State Fullerton in the history department, at the classroom that he was teaching in. Death threats called into the family home after midnight. My sister answers, she gets all freaked out. Oh no, I don't want you to do it. There, someone's going to kill you. I go, give me a break. It's the guy from the city council, or I don't know, the school board or something. I don't know. Should I tell you his name? Hollingshead. Oops. We suspected he had a lot to do with it because the rhetoric and how he was quoted in the newspapers and letters sounded very familiar on the phone. Let's just put it that way. To when relayed by family members who had been, duly threatened. Yeah, threaten the kids. Threatened my dad. My dad had nothing to do with it, but he was okay with it because who liked Nixon? Well, who likes Trump? Now you know. And they're willing to go to extremes to prove their point, and they always have, apparently. But the people who lived in the actual house that Richard M. Nixon was born in it was actually quite cute. The day of the rally, they set up a little baked cookie stand and had refreshments, probably lemonade. I think I remember some lemonade, and water, that kind of stuff. But I thought that was rather neat. That people were, somewhat tacitly agreeing that we were having an event there, and they knew what it was for. We called it more of a teach-in rather than a rally. A rally was sort of denotes rah-rah, shish boom bah kind of attitude. That wasn't what it was about. No, it was more of a teach-in. It was explaining what impeachment was, the history of the war, history of civil rights, women's rights, human rights, senior citizen rights. We even, old age. Did we call it old age? No, we call it senior citizens, but you don't even say that anymore. Old people. We'll call ourselves old people. Senior citizen. Give me a break. But, it encompassed the better part of the day, and we had live music. It was really quite grand. The head of the ACLU for Southern California came and gave a little talk. The local Congress critters. The head of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. There was quite a few people who were up there on the stage. And it was actually quite well attended by the public as well, and well covered by the press, because we were right in the heart of it. So I guess they felt justified in calling in bomb threats to my dad's office and classes at Cal State Fullerton, calling in death threats on the phone after midnight so that my sister would pick up. It's just crazy stuff. So Alvin Bragg and all the rest of them are being duly threatened as well. And you can rest assured that if that group finds out who were the actual arrestees of this, I call them a traitor, they will be threatened, and so will their families. Rest assured, because this is how that party rolls. And for some reason, we're supposed to make comity with them. No. You don't shake hands with a Nazi. You have to punch the Nazi. My God. So, Missouri's shutting down its libraries. That's always nice to hear. I think about Benjamin Franklin. What would he be saying right now? We warned you about a party system. We warned you this would happen. And they did. They warned us. And it's happening exactly like they said it would. We have to hear the Federalist Society and others tell us, oh my God, it's originalism. Yeah, it's so original, it's a fiction. You're making it up. And they have been all along. We made it as a joke because it was so obvious. Everybody thought, oh, isn't that cute? And exactly what Benjamin Franklin, Jefferson, Madison, all of them, they warned us this would happen. They also warned us what would happen when big money, they didn't call it that then, but they called it, it was known as big money, were too much a part of our political system. It's not to say that, big bucks or, fat cat burgermeisters of the day weren't helpful in the revolution. But you don't want fat cats, running the show. Because that's what they'll do. They don't have any national allegiance. They don't. I was just then reminded that our system was predicated upon a landed gentry as being the only ones who could vote, but for the time, it was actually quite democratic. It encompassed a lot more of those landowners than previously were allowed. Let's put it that way. Squires. Everybody was a squire. Everybody was a baron of their own baron and baronet. Oh, God. It's Friday. We made it. We made it to Friday. And what's going to happen? What's going to happen over the weekend? I mean, hell, you got DeSantis pushing out edicts, the ones that people really hate, like a 6-week abortion ban. Puts that out after almost midnight local time on Twitter. And the way that algorithm's set up, you might not have heard it. And I think that was on purpose. Sure is. And what do we say about Elon Musk? What can you say? He's doing the job that he was tasked to do, and that was pretty much to destroy one of the great organizing platforms that spontaneously, organically arose somehow. Think of all the different movements that never would have happened without this communication device, let alone, tidal waves and volcanic eruptions. Get away now from people like, half a world away. Sensors show that you better get out. You're there right now. You got to go. It's going to be a bunch of volcanic plasma coming out of the side of that mountain. Get away. Bad gases. People who were caught in snowbanks, who were able to get a signal and told people in real time that these are my coordinates, and you were rescued, buried in snow. Not anymore. Nope. There's a little bit of collateral damage when you want to, have a fascist takeover of pretty much the world. I think that's important enough to raise a few French 77s. I don't know, in sorrow? I don't know. Or maybe it's just to steel our nerves and get to work. All right, and we do have a little bit of work today, and that is to bring you some pertinent information that's just been floating out in the ether, and we just grabbed it because it's Friday. So what do we have in store for you since we've gone quite a bit of time already? Yeah, Clarence Thomas has absolutely violated federal law, and we know that. But will anything come of it? I don't know. Balls and strikes, man. They never call their own people out on balls and strikes. Isn't that weird? On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, an Orange County, California school district wants to overrule its own Literature Review Committee of educators and parents, raising concerns of book bans. And in the interest of openness and fairness, it was the school district that I went to high school at. Oregon likely broke federal law by hiring over 100 unqualified special education teachers for the school year. And the Arkansas Attorney General is working hard to convince the courts racism is over, so it's okay to segregate the schools again. That's how they roll. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Norway expelled 15 Russian diplomats suspected of spying. That goes around. And Slovakia's central bank chief was fined for bribery, but still faces a trial. They do things a little differently there, apparently. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. To forego the usuals at this point, except to remind you to go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com for the live player, of course, the schedule of our shows throughout the day and the weeks. Yes, weeks. And also the usual links for helping us keep this powerhouse of resistance afloat. So thank you for your generosity in that. So we will get right into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it comes from the voice of OC, Orange County, by Hassam Elatar. I hope that I have pronounced your name correctly. If I haven't, well, I'm truly sorry. A majority of Placentia-Yorba Linda Unified School District trustees want to decide what books get piloted by students, a move that some worry will open the door to book bans and strip the voice of educators in deciding curriculum material. District trustees at their Tuesday meeting voted 3-2 to introduce a revision to their book selection and evaluation policy that requires them to vote on books before they get tested with students, and not a literature review committee made up of educators and parents. Trustee Todd Frazier, who called for the policy revision, and Trustee Leandra Blades have said the change will bring more transparency and accountability to the book selection process. There's no oversight up to this point in the process. There has been none, Blades whined. I think she's whining. Some parents have raised concerns that the proposed policy change may lead to book bans, while others are worried about the type of material and books being tested in the classrooms. I think if you eliminate the voice of the Literature Review Committee, it will lead to books being banned in our district, Parent Brooke Harper said in a phone interview last week. Frazier called for the change in policy after Blades recently raised concerns with some of the language used towards women in an Iranian Revolution book that was piloted with 11th grade students. The school board ended up unanimously approving the Iranian Revolution book, and we'll find out why soon here. Trustee Carrie Buck said the elected trustees are not qualified to decide what books get tested. We are not experts in this field, she said at the meeting. We should not be the 5 that are determining this before it goes through any of the process. Frazier interjected, I'm just trying to protect students. The revision would also require district officials to inform parents when a book is being piloted and give them the option to opt their kids out. Trustee Marilyn Anderson and Buck supported informing parents that a book is being piloted, but oppose the board members deciding what books get tested. In the current policy, the district's literature review committee decides what books get tested in the district after a teacher requests a book to be piloted. We already go through a process where we look carefully at our district and who we are, said Superintendent Michael Matthews, and we bring books forward that we think can be acceptable in our community. I know that community, and should remind folks that that particular high school that I went to, El Dorado, the Misfits hated them. So did Agent Orange. Agent Orange actually has a quite infamous song about El Dorado and how much they hated it. The proposed policy needs one more vote by district officials before it is finalized. Some parents, like Shani Murray, are also raising concerns similar to Ren's Buck. If you support parent rights, then support my right to have trained professionals select my students' curriculum. I can opt out. Don't give yourself the authority to opt out on my behalf, she told the school board members during Tuesday's public comment. Both Buck and Anderson also expressed concern that the move would strip community members' voice on what books get added to the curriculum. It seems one book that has already been taught would not have received approval from one trustee. Blades said she would not have allowed internment to be piloted in the district. The fictional book is about Muslim Americans being sent to internment camps. I read it, and I know other people were reading it. Well, I wouldn't want one of my kids to read it, and it's been in the classroom, she said. The book is already part of the language arts curriculum Study Sync for high schoolers and was approved through the current literature review process. And the district is considering adding it to the core reading list for 11th graders. Now, despite the concerns raised by Blades about an Iranian Revolution book last month, trustees ended up unanimously approving the book to be added to their core and extended reading list for high schoolers. The book, Paraspolis, The Story of Childhood, depicts author Marjan Strapi's life growing up in Tehran in the late 70s amid the revolution and the overthrow of the Shah, which would lead to the country becoming an Islamic republic. Their decision came after district staff presented mostly positive feedback from community members and students who read the book. Anderson said she had hesitations at first about reading a graphic novel, but enjoyed it in the end. I absolutely love this book, and I never would have picked it up, Anderson said. Thank you for opening my eyes. Alex Beaumart of the Oregon Capital Chronicle brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. More than 130 emergency licensed teachers are filling in as special education instructors in Oregon this year, shortchanging thousands of students and potentially violating federal law. That law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, ensures that children with disabilities are given an appropriate public education equal to that of their peers without disabilities, including equal class time and access to qualified teachers. But an emergency teacher in Oregon does not have to meet the high standards required by federal law for special education teachers, who must have a bachelor's degree and full state certification to teach special education or be in the process of receiving certification while enrolled in a special education degree program. The state is responsible for ensuring the law is followed, but Oregon education officials appear to be shirking that responsibility. Officials at the Oregon Department of Education and the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission, which licenses teachers in the state, said they don't know whether the 131 emergency special education teachers working in schools are on a pathway to full licensure. The Oregon Capital Chronicle had found that out in a joint statement. The department and commission said school and district administrators are responsible for ensuring teachers are qualified. But the law states that state educational agencies must establish and maintain qualifications to ensure that teachers are appropriately and adequately prepared and trained, and that they have the knowledge and skills to serve the children with disabilities. Special education teachers in Oregon needed a degree and proper training. Emergency teachers do not need either. They are supposed to fill gaps when administrators cannot find a fully licensed teacher, and the state cannot waive special education requirements on an emergency basis, the law says. Now, the state has relied more heavily on emergency licensed teachers since COVID. The latest public records obtained focus on emergency licensed teachers who are filling in as special education teachers. They show that 131 emergency instructors teaching students with disabilities represent a quarter of all emergency teachers working in schools. The state has 2,005 full-time special education teachers who are assisted by 23,000 support staff. Most support staff are not required to have special training, and they are not supposed to substitute for licensed special education teachers. And the students are paying the price. Leaving students with the greatest needs with the least certified and least trained teachers may have contributed to achievement gaps. About 70% of 4th and 8th graders with disabilities in Oregon scored below basic in reading on the latest National Assessment of Educational Progress, the nation's report card, in early 2022. Austin Bailey of the Arkansas Times brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. As Arkansas pursues a new golden era for school segregationists with the Arkansas Learns universal voucher scam, some old court orders are still keeping white flight at bay. But time might be nearly up for South Arkansas school districts that have successfully fought state efforts to force them to allow white flight transfers under the state school choice law of 2013. But this week, Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin filed briefs to repeal the federal desegregation supervision that keeps the districts from having to comply with the state law that allows students to leave their home districts and enroll in other public school districts. It's not unheard of for white parents to take their children out of predominantly black districts and flee to majority white districts instead. But in a news release from Griffin's office this week, he declared segregation ended decades ago. Of course, not everyone agrees with Griffin's assessment that segregation is no longer a problem. Whitney Moore, an attorney for the school districts with desegregation orders still in place, said that what Griffin is seeking to do will be segregative. Segregation spurred by school choice is also a worry for Representative Jim Wooten of Beebe, one of only 5 Republican lawmakers to vote against the LEARNS Act. We're headed down a path to where we were 50 years ago, he said. And I guess, to some in Arkansas, those are the good old days. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, a minute 25 for the film and 13 seconds for male geeks. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves shows how easily D&D's story beats can translate to an action-adventure fantasy melodrama. It's pretty much because they're the same thing. Your thief campaign can basically be a heist film, which is the spine of this movie. Writer-directors Jonathan Goldstein, John Francis Daley, and writer Michael Giglio turn out a solid script that uses a couple of plot formulas well, but mostly wins with character. And it turns out that the current D&D rules about giving your RPG characters aspirational ideals, societal, organizational, and personal bonds, and moral or interpersonal flaws make very entertaining movie characters, like when you lie easily, and your ride-or-die buddy is always brutally honest. One smart thing our writing trio does, no prominent dwarves or high elves, because you can't beat the Lord of the Rings, and why try? Especially when D&D has so many other races you can play with, and because Hasbro probably wants this movie to be a D&D showcase. Of course, our movie-making bros slavishly apply 3 of Hollywood's favorite action tropes: the family in jeopardy, the damsel in distress, and the redemptive dad. The movie is also resiliently male-centric. All of the female characters are either to be protected by or acquired by men, or are stalwarts in helping men achieve their goals. For the male characters, their goals drive the plot, and 2 of them have the only developmental arcs in the film. You know, this is the second recent Chris Pine flick I've seen like this. Coincidence? He is an executive producer here. If you're not a male geek, stop listening now. This is the D&D movie you've been waiting for. It's not a perfect port, and that's a plus, because now you can sit back and smugly say, that's not the way it would really happen, just for you. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day that 114 agricultural laborers in California's Imperial Valley paid a harsh price for joining together to try and improve their working conditions. The Great Depression was worsening the already difficult conditions faced by California farm laborers. The workers had gathered at a hall in El Centro, a city in the valley. The meeting was called together by the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union. The union often faced great opposition because some of its leaders had communist ties. The meeting in Imperial Valley included many Filipino and Mexican workers, along with white and black laborers. One by one, the workers stood up and told their stories of harsh labor performed under the unforgiving California sun. Suddenly, the door of the hall burst open. In poured armed sheriff's deputies and gun-toting thugs hired by the growers. At their head was Sheriff Gillette. Every single worker at the meeting was arrested. They were chained together, loaded into the back of trucks, and transported to the county jail. There, they were charged with violating the Criminal Syndicalism Act. During the first Red Scare of the 20th century, California was one of 20 states to enact laws criminalizing syndicalism. 9 stood trial in front of Superior Court Judge Von Thompson. 3 Mexican workers were ordered deported. The remaining 6 were convicted and sentenced to between 2 and 42 years in prison. They were ordered to serve hard time either at Folsom State Prison or San Quentin. Judge Thompson declared that for communists, anything less than a life sentence was lenient. In 1933, the final 2 prisoners were released from prison. Organizing California farm workers was a long and difficult campaign that faced great opposition.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 31 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid to upper 60s, so a bit warmer than yesterday, mostly sunny throughout the day. Winds light and variable, and then partly cloudy overnight with lows in the mid to upper 30s, winds remaining light and variable, and then partly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the upper 60s to low 70s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen remains, grass pollen is rated low, so we do have grass pollen out there. I was wondering what was happening, because I sure feel stuffed up. Well, regardless, grass pollen is rated low here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is actually quite good at 18 parts per million, though that daytime UV index is now in the high range and has ticked up to level 7. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.04 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 98%. And we'll be having some high humidity days and nights, which means we'll have frost in the mornings from these chilly, chilly nights. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 49 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 47 with a rain shower. Rome is 58 degrees with rain. Kyiv is 50 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 64 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 76 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 64 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 58 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and partly cloudy, and New York, New York is 89 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy, with an air quality alert, so do take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jan M. Olson of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Norway's government said that it was expelling 15 Russian diplomats from the country, saying they were suspected of spying while working at the Russian embassy in Oslo. Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt said the move was an important measure to counter and reduce the scope of Russian intelligence activities in Norway and thereby secure our national interests. The Russians declared persona non grata must leave Norway within a short time, Huitfeldt said, adding, "We will not grant visas to intelligence officers who apply for a visa to Norway." The minister declined to say whether the government was acting in response to a specific incident, referring questions to Norway's domestic security agency, PST, for details. The government said the activities of the expelled diplomats were incompatible with their diplomatic status. We're not talking about regular diplomats, but intelligence officers under diplomatic cover. Their activities are a threat to Norwegian interests, Huitfeldt said. Norwegian newspaper VG described the expulsions as the most the Scandinavian country has ordered at one time, involving Russian diplomats. The Russian embassy in Norway called the Norwegian government's decision an extremely unfriendly step and promised Moscow would take retaliatory measures, which in such a case typically involves in-kind expulsions. Huitfeldt reacted during an afternoon news conference saying Russia has no reason to respond. We have Norwegian diplomats stationed in Russia, but none of them are undercover intelligence officers. She called Russia an unpredictable neighbor, and many European countries in the past year have expelled hundreds of Russian intelligence officers under diplomatic cover. At the same time, she stressed that the government in Oslo wants normal diplomatic relations with Russia and that Russia diplomats are welcome in Norway. We do not want people who claim they are diplomats and who are actually intelligence officers, she said. We cannot accept that. A year ago, Norway expelled 3 Russian diplomats it identified as intelligence officers, a man whom the Norwegian Police Security Service alleged used a false name and identity while working for one of Russia's intelligence services, also was arrested last year. He is still awaiting trial in Norway.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The head of Slovakia's central bank, who is a member of the European Central Bank Committee that decides monetary policy for 20 countries, was convicted yesterday, Thursday, of bribery and fined 100,000 euros, which is the equivalent of $110,000 U.S. The country's special criminal court handed National Bank of Slovakia Governor Peter Kazimir a 2-year suspended sentence, said Katarina Kujakova, a spokesperson for the court. Not paying the fine would mean jail time. The verdict was issued without a trial. However, the state prosecution service appealed it shortly afterwards, sending the case back to court. Kazimir also could appeal. He is accused of handing a bribe of about $53,000 U.S. to the head of the country's tax office related to a tax investigation of private companies, but few details were available because there was no trial. Kazimir did not immediately comment, but he previously denied any wrongdoing. Slovakia is one of 20 countries that use the euro currency, and Kazimir is a member of the European Central Bank's Governing Council. Its main decision-making body, the ECB, said it had no comment. The date The case dates to when Casimir served as finance minister from 2012 to 2019 in the leftist government of populist Prime Minister Robert Fico, and was a member of Fico's Smer Social Democracy Party before taking over his central bank job. Smer lost the 2020 general election and was replaced by a coalition government whose parties campaigned on an anti-corruption ticket. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.